The first year on the job, at the Met job, I did this, which I was kind of freaked out. It's like, man, I'm brand new here. You know, you don't know what's going on, if that's going to make a bad impression or whatever. But it was my left leg, and I sit, so that's the leg that you stick the bass against. And I had a cast from my ankle to my ass.
Really?
Straight. So I had to get into the pit with this cast, you know, and I tried to figure out, like, I first rigged up like a bicycle seat on my stool, and I wore bike shorts under my tux pants. But, you know, when you ride your bike, you never sit dead on the bike seat, and it just killed me. So I figured out something else, and, you know, the stagehands were trying to help me, and my first show back was Les Troyens, Berlioz, 5 hours.
Oh, no.
And, like, you know, 1,000 people in the pit, and Charlie Urbach, who's another bass player, has this really fine old Grand Chino, and I reached down and I just tried to kind of push it out of the way, and the thing rolled over and bounced on the bridge and cracked the top.
Really? Oh! That is just a taste of what you're going to hear in this wonderful conversation. I had such a great time chatting with our guest today. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and we are talking today with Leigh Mesh. And Leigh is the Associate Principal Bass of the MET Orchestra. That's the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra in New York City. He also teaches at Bard College, and he played for a year in the Chicago Symphony. And that's where we lead off with this conversation. We talk about Michael Hovnanian, who is a bassist in the Chicago Symphony, my teacher when I was at Northwestern, and the conversation goes from there. It is fantastic. Leigh just recovered or is recovering from a bike accident. We talk about cycling and how that plays into his life, skiing, two big passions of his, so much more. I know you're going to love this conversation. I'd like to thank Robertson & Sons Violins, Upton Bass, D'Addario Strings, and A440, great sponsors supporting this endeavor that is Contrabass Conversations. We'll chat more about them later. We're going to lead off with a short clip of Leigh playing an excerpt from Brahms 2. There's a link in the show notes if you want to hear Leigh play this entire excerpt and chat about it. It's on New World's wonderful website, Musaic. All right, here we go with our conversation featuring Leigh Mesh. The Chicago Symphony was just in town playing, and I got together for some lunch with Michael Hovnanian, and I said, hey, I'm going to be chatting with Leigh Mesh in a few days, and he said, oh, tell him hi. And
that's great. No, I mean, we had a wonderful time when I was there with those guys, formed a big bond.
I'll bet. Because you were there, that was right before you got the position in the Met, right? You
Correct.
Were CSL? Okay.
A long time ago.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, I'm talking to you with my mangled body from my bike crash. So I've got my splint. Yeah.
Wow.
But I'm cool. I'm good.
What happened though? Where were you when that happened?
I mountain bike, I road bike. I do a lot of adrenaline stuff, which I should not be doing. I've ridden for years, and I was mountain biking in a place close to my house, which has got a lot of really dangerous features. And I was riding down a steep rock, and the bike went out, and I fell a long way onto my right shoulder. So I broke my collarbone, my scapula, and ribs 1 through 9 on my right side.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was really heavy. And I'm cool, and I'm really lucky, and it's bones, and bones heal. And because if you blow out your shoulder or do your rotator cuff, that's a whole totally different story. But still, it's been major.
Okay, I'll bet.
Yeah.
I'll bet. When did that happen? A couple months ago, or
September 17th? So exactly a month ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Have you been out are you out for a while in terms of playing? Then
I'm out. I'm totally out.
Yeah.
Yeah. I haven't been able to use or put weight on my right arm.
Is that the worst you've had for biking or skiing or something like that? Is that the big accident for you?
Well, I've had other accidents.
Yeah,
it's not like I'm an accident-prone guy, and I could actually ride pretty well and ski really well. It's my two big things. I've broken my left knee and then my right ankle, but like after that, I would just jump in, and I have some funny bass related stories with that too, because generally after a week I would just go back to work. It didn't affect my playing at all. The first year on the job, at the Met job, I did this, which I was kind of freaked out. It's like, man, I'm brand new here. You don't know what's going on, if that's going to make a bad impression or whatever. But it was my left leg, and I sit, so that's the leg that you stick the bass against. And I had a cast from my ankle to my ass.
Really?
Straight. So I had to get into the pit with this cast, and I tried to figure out, like, I first rigged up like a bicycle seat on my stool, and I wore bike shorts under my tux pants. But, when you ride your bike, you never sit dead on the bike seat, and it just killed me. So I figured out something else, and, the stagehands were trying to help me. And my first show back was Les Troyens, Berlioz, 5 hours.
Oh, no.
And 1,000 people in the pit. And Charlie Urban, who's another bass player, it has this really fine old Grand Chino, and I reached down and I just tried to kind of push it out of the way, and the thing rolled over and bounced on the bridge and cracked the top.
Really? Oh, I remember Dan Kreckler. So one of your sections. So Dan and I played in the Civic Orchestra back in the day.
Sure.
And he had I don't know what he's playing on these days, probably something better, but he had a pretty nice bass when he was in Civic. This bass player came on stage and just and kicked the heck out of Dan's scroll, and this bass just went spinning, and the guy, it's like exactly what you don't want to hear from a section mate. The guy was like, "Oh no, my foot, it hurts so bad." Like not one word to do with the bass.
Oh man.
Well, thanks for doing this, man. And this is super informal. I just start chatting, and it's sort of like stitch it together, and
Sure.
So I'm pumped to chat with you. And you're somebody, I keep a list when someone recommends, hey, you should chat with so and so, and I've got your name on that list so many times over the years. So I'm just like, I'm glad to chat with you finally.
Hey, it's an honor. Hey, let me tell you, it's awesome what you're doing. It's super cool. It's, I was listening to a bunch of podcasts. I drove out west this summer, and it's a totally cool thing. It's absolutely positive. It's great. So thank you for doing it.
Well, it's fun. Awesome. It's fun for me, right? Because it's like, what a cool thing to sit down and chat with people about, geek out about bass and careers and auditions or whatever, and then get to put it out to the world. So it's like, it's a totally, it's like a no-brainer for me. I'm having a blast doing it. So you've been like 92, 93. That's probably when you got into the Met.
Yes.
Something like that.
My Chicago years was 92, 93.
Okay.
And it was kind of in conjunction with Rob Kassinger. It's funny, we've been on this bizarre trajectory. It was like the way that all panned out. That was 92, 93, and then I started the Met in 93. So, yeah.
Okay. And where'd you grow up?
I grew up in New York. Okay. Just actually not far from where I'm living now in Westchester, kind of on the Long Island Sound, Portchester, New York.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. And so, and then you were at Curtis with, were you there around when like Peter Lloyd or Brad or?
Yeah, those guys were before me, except Peter was in the Philly Orchestra. So we hung a lot, and we did a lot of playing excerpts. I played a lot of stuff for him. I got a lot of help from him. He was really into the whole, kind of being involved and listening thing there. Yeah. I was in school with Tim Cobb. So we were like, really close buddies, and Jeremy McCoy, and we all ended up playing in the Met together. Yeah. So I first went to school at Purchase College.
Really?
Which is, I did 2 years in Purchase. Then I got into Curtis, which was strange and miraculous how it all happened, but that's a funny story.
What were you at Purchase to be performance? I always think of education when I think of Purchase or some of those,
No, Purchase was a really, it was brand new at that point. And this was 81, 82, 83. Yeah. So 81 is when I started. And I mean, they had tons of cash, unbelievable facility. I mean, we're talking like harpsichords all over the place, small organs. I mean, just crazy, Oh,
wow.
I got in there. I couldn't play at all, but they needed bass players, and I think they sensed some kind of talent or something. And I knew after 2 years that I had to go somewhere, and I wanted to go somewhere with a just like a much higher level of playing, not to put that down, but just I wanted to be in that environment. So I did a recital and I sent the cassette to Roger Scott. This is like kind of the old days. Yeah. And he's like, well, look, you missed the deadline and, apply next year. I'm like, yeah, I kind of figured that, but I figured what the hell. Somebody left his studio. It might have been Bruce Ridge or something, and there was an opening, or Cleland No, a guy who's bass player. And because I had sent my tape to him, it was like, he said, well, why don't you just come down and audition? This is like in June or something. And I went down there and played, and he took me. This is before the pre-screening, and that kind of ordeal. I thought, like, if that would, so I kind of slipped in, I think either he saw something, but I think a lot of it was luck. I was in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. How did you end up at Purchase in the first place? Like, did you start bass in high school, or how did that all work for you?
I mean, my story is probably the same as most people's. Like, I started the rock and roll garage band, right?
Sure.
So I first started on acoustic guitar and learned some tunes, and then I really wanted an electric guitar, and this is what I was into, not classical first. We got the electric guitar, then we set up in the garage, and then, of course, nobody could play bass, and then I started playing bass a little bit, but I really wanted to be the drummer because that was, like, cooler, so I had a crummy drum set in the garage, and basically, I was kind of all over the place and undirected in high school, but music was always a constant, and I loved music, and it always spoke to me, so in my senior year of high school, there was a double bass I knew that belonged to my high school. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to get this bass. I'm going to learn it and go to music school. So it was really stupid and whimsical and just kind of like far out there. But it just seemed to me like I'll learn this thing. And it was also about trying to finally become disciplined at something. I was tired of messing around in school and just not working. Mm-hmm. So it's funny. So I went to get this bass, and it had been in the shop teacher's basement next to his boiler for years. So the thing was completely dried out. And he brought it in with cord to help together because all of the glue was off. So it was literally like hanging together by a thread. And there were some kids who were messing around, and somebody got pushed into it, and it just exploded.
Oh, really?
The top in pieces, the ribs, the back. So I actually never played on that bass. I got a rental bass, but I have all of the pieces of it. And I used to hang it up on my wall as kind of like an abstract sculpture for years in every place. And now I still have that, but I don't have enough wall space to hang it up. But anyway, so I started taking lessons. I got the name of a woman, June Rotenberg, who was an extra in the Met, actually. And she took me, and I had literally just a few months of lessons. And then I auditioned for music schools, and Purchase took me. So, I mean, it's a different world, than it is now. I think, getting into top music schools or Rice or anything, it's hard. So was it easier back then? Maybe. I don't know. But
hard to say. But it must have been a big change, though. Like Purchase to Curtis, right? And in Roger Scott's studio. I mean, what was that like landing there?
I mean, it was really interesting. I was in the sink or swim school. I realized that the thing that was amazing to me about those years is that the education that I walked away with, not only being at Curtis with all the unbelievable instrumentalists, but just the Philadelphia style of orchestral playing that he taught. So the bass class, I don't know if you ever talked to any other Roger Scott students, but the way he set up his bass classes was kind of remarkable. I remember the first class would always be Mozart 36th Symphony because it was C major. It was relatively easy compared to Hofner or something else, but it was kind of like a way to start out with a kind of concept of a Mozart style off the string stroke. And we would all line up. We'd be in a semicircle. There were 7 at that time, maybe there were 8. And basically what he would do, he'd sit in the middle, and you'd get your Zimmerman book, and you'd go through the whole symphony. You play it, and people would play it individually. And that's his bass class. And I like it. I mean, I believe in it. It was, for some people, it was a way to get you comfortable playing in front of your colleagues. It wasn't meant to intimidate you, but I mean, let's face it, we all have to get used to playing in front of people. And, I thought I could play, and then I realized that first bass class that I couldn't play at all. And, you're just mortified and you freeze up and you have no spiccato, and little by little you get looser and you learn from listening to people. Tim was in my bass class, and these other guys who were way more advanced than I was. And yeah, that was my introduction to Curtis.
Nice. That's well, it's amazing having that cohort you're going through. People like Tim. You absorb. I was talking with like some of these younger players that have been winning auditions recently that have come from like Paul Ellison's studio and Rice, right? And just talking so much about like the cohort of that group, right? It's
Absolutely.
like you spend maybe an hour, maybe 2 hours tops or something with that teacher, maybe a bass class, but you spend, like the rest of your week in a room by yourself, but like getting a chance to just absorb what those people are doing around you. That makes such a difference.
Well, we do that more than most other instrumentalists.
Yeah.
Certainly more than other strings. Violinists have kind of this thing going on. But there's a lot of camaraderie, I think. Yeah. And I see it everywhere. I see it in every conservatory that I've, done something with or known students with. You play for your friends, you play for your colleagues, you play for your peers. Mm-hmm. People drive to auditions together. Yeah. I mean, it's a really competitive thing, but it's yet a supportive thing in bass. And I learned, if not as much or more, from my friends and colleagues going through.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a great thing.
Did you keep up? Have you always been into cycling and skiing and that sort of thing? Like, were you into that when you were young too?
Yeah. When I was, I started late, but I think when I finally started skiing when I was 12 or 13, I would take out the pictures of ski or skiing magazines. So there was 2 magazines, and I basically made wallpaper of my entire wall. I was just kind of obsessed with it. And I would ski with my friends, and we skied together. We, believe it or not, we raced in high school. There's a little hill north of us. And if I wasn't playing bass, I was probably going to do the whole ski bum routine and move to a ski town and just try and work and ski and see if I could kind of make my way into that industry. I was so passionate about it. And that took much the back seat when I was learning bass. Obviously, I had to learn bass. It's hard to justify, going off for a ski trip when you need to practice and you can't play in tune,
Right.
But my closest friend growing up actually lived close to me, and he became a lawyer, and then he couldn't take it anymore. And he lives in Aspen now, outside Aspen. So I'm kind of like a split personality. I have this whole crew of friends that know nothing about music, and they live in that world. And then I have this other amazing world of musician friends and colleagues. So I get together with these guys and ladies and ski with them out west, and we've done trips together. So, yeah.
And some people think that music and athletics have nothing to do with each other. And then a lot of people think that they are amazingly connected. I mean, do you think that's affected the way you approach like bass playing in any sort of aspect at all? Just like being a skier, being a cyclist, do you think that's affected the way you approach the instrument at all?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I have known such incredible athletes that are musicians. Like in school, there were so many just amazingly gifted and talented athletes, great ping pong players. We had ping pong at Curtis, and just to see how athletically they were kind of gifted. And it kind of translates, right? We're very similar to what athletes do: repetitive motion, good coordination. I think for me, when I started getting really serious about cycling, pretty much after, I always cycled, but it was after I got the MET job, I felt like I could kind of settle and just let the bass playing for the practicing for survival in terms of getting where I wanted to be. I could let that go a little bit and focus on cycling. So I raced. I didn't go too far in racing, but the discipline of the pain and discomfort involved in cycling or running or something like that was it really translated Actually, no, I'm sorry. Come to think of it, by the time I was on the audition circuit and finally got the Met job, I mean, I could practice for a lot of hours. But I think the discipline of working through that discomfort is kind of instrumental.
Yeah. Well, and I can't help but think as you're talking about that, I've subbed a fair amount with lyric opera in Chicago, and I remember being in that pit for Rosenkavalier, right? And things get longer than that. But I remember sitting there just watching that clock go around. It's like 7:30, 8:30. And talk about like discipline to just like get through something long term. I mean, it's got to translate over to the opera pit for you.
Well, Rosenkavalier, you're engaged the whole time.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Unlike if you're playing, there's a lot of things that are really long where you're playing bel canto-ish type of just pure accompaniment where you're not challenged.
Yeah.
And then you have to call upon some kind of discipline in it, to get through the less challenging lengths of time. Yeah, that's certainly true.
How do you get? I find it totally fascinating to talk to people with opera gigs and like how do you get through some of those more bel canto performances? Like, do you have any strategies? Because I mean, I can't imagine you can be on 100% for 4 hours, 5 hours. Like how do you manage that?
See, I don't want to like incriminate myself if you're going to put this out there. It's really, really interesting. I mean, it's a kind of couple part question, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't want this to sound again negative, but if you're playing principal, there's much more incentive to concentrate more. That sounds wrong. I can't even put my finger on it. Even when I've sat assistant principal second, or when Larry Glazner, when I first started, I was third. You just mentally let down a little bit. You feel like, okay, that person's playing principal. It's like you kind of just back off a little bit on the concentration. But when you're playing first, I feel obligated, even just to come in. Because I find when the principal doesn't come in solidly, all of a sudden the things in the section just kind of let down a little bit. Whereas if the principal's really on and really focused, then it's kind of, it permeates throughout the section. So if I'm playing a long bel canto that's not challenging, you find stuff generally we have incredible singers. So the most unchallenging piece, Norma, for instance, we were just doing that and I ended up missing them all because of this injury. But listen to the vocal line. That's what it's all about. And then for me, look, I love playing the ring, right? And stuff that showcases us as much as any other instrument in the orchestra. But there's a real beauty to playing the downbeat and playing the third beat in a 4/4 bar and playing it beautifully, because if you do and you play it elegantly, it's a springboard for everything else. So it doesn't matter what I'm playing.
Back to our conversation in a moment, but I want to thank our sponsor, Robertson & Sons Violins. It's so great to have them on board. And they have, for over 4 decades, been providing the highest quality string instruments and bows to collectors, to professional musicians, music educators, and students. Their facility, wow. If you have not been to Albuquerque, get to Albuquerque and go to Robertson's on Carlisle Boulevard there in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Beautiful place. My wife's from there. And it's a gorgeous shop. 3 instrument showrooms, 1 room just dedicated to basses, and this beautiful recital hall. Seats a couple hundred people. They have, I think Don Robertson said, 200, is that right, concerts a year? It was some very large number. I'll have to check that. But what a great contribution to the artistic landscape of Albuquerque, having this beautiful hall there. And they do so many things for the bass community. Check them out, robertsonviolins.com. And thanks for sponsoring the podcast. And I'd like to give a shout out to Upton Bass, a longtime sponsor of the blog and the podcast, and I love what they do. And one of the things I especially love is their car model bass. This has continued to be refined, enhanced. It continues to evolve with input from Gary Carr. And so this is an introduction. The Carr model, it's got a great combination of comfort and tone. It's got a loyal following with jazz players, with roots players. It's got this comfortable Carr neck, slim neck, very comfortable if you play electric bass primarily. Check it out. Link in the show notes, uptonbass.com. Thanks for sponsoring the podcast, guys. All right, here we go. Back into our conversation with Leigh Mesh.
What's interesting, what you're describing reminds me of Shinji Ashima, one of the bass players in the San Francisco Opera out here. I was talking, he's been doing and he plays in the ballet. He's been doing some composing for the ballet, been writing these and I was asking him, like, what does he find satisfying about playing in the bass section? And he was like, just playing the downbeat, just playing a beautiful pizzicato, like on beat one and on beat three, like those simple pleasures of life. This like beautiful piece of wood you're playing on,
Right.
And it's kind of cool to, it's like, I love when I chat with, professionals in that sort of setting, just those simple pleasures in life are kind of like what keeps them coming back to that,
Yeah, exactly. And, that's so funny he says that, right? Because certainly we play a lot of those types of arrival pizzas in opera, maybe more so than symphonic literature where it's the simplest thing and it's one note. But if it's beautiful, it rings and it's kind of this mushroom cloud. That's great. That's incredible.
And placing those, just in an opera context, but I think Greg Sarche in Lyric, he said, like, the thing with opera playing is you so rarely settle into a groove. You're either like, there's rubato, you're waiting for the singer, this or that, there's accelerato and all this. And so like, just the added challenges of like placing that sort of thing precisely together as a section in the right musical place with the singers, with the conductor, with the orchestra. I mean, it's a special kind of challenge. I think it's unique to opera playing.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's, your brain definitely does not go on autopilot. Even in the bel canto stuff, the simplest accompaniment where you could check out and just stop listening, then all of a sudden the singer will take rubato, do something, and then you're not with people. So.
Yeah. It is, and I've got so many different ways to, but it might be interesting just in terms of like playing together as a section. Like someone comes in and subs with you guys. Maybe it's like one of the first times they've done that. How do they fit in with you guys? What should they be paying attention to? Watching the conductor, watching the principal player? Like what are some of the things that someone might find surprising coming in and subbing with your section?
Wow, that's so interesting. You can't see the principal.
Okay.
I mean, generally, also, it's the same thing with the violins. Like, my wife is associate concertmaster. She's in the firsts. Two stands behind the concertmaster, unless they're elevated on a bass stool, you're not going to see them. You kind of see them. So visually, you got to be careful. Also, if you look at the conductor, you also have to be careful visually because often they're beating ahead. We tend to play behind the beat, which is bizarre. You just have to listen more so than you ever thought would be possible. And I know it's really uncomfortable for people coming in that are unfamiliar with the repertoire because, I mean, I was petrified my first couple of years playing. I was the master of playing like a nanosecond after the principal next to me. And I was like, in a way that it was imperceptible because I didn't want to stick out. But I made plenty of mistakes, believe me. But it's for the Met, it's all about listening. And it's definitely a style that people it becomes homogenous. But I would say often, if the conductor gives a beat and it's incorrect and the singer hasn't resolved, the orchestra will play with the singer. Most of the time, always. So you just to listen and fit in.
It's part of the sort of the magic of music making at that level.
I mean, there's so much magic that happens there that it's just astounding in terms of like a chamber music sense within the orchestra. And, that's been really gratifying at the Met because it's a more kind of, we play really more vocally because we hear it all the time coming from the singers. And then you hear their rubato and their natural phrasing in a way that I hadn't heard anywhere else up to that point.
And that has to have had a major effect on just the way you approach your own instrument and your own playing. Hearing like the top singers in the world, you know, every day, and just like thinking like you're describing this like large chamber music setting. Do you think that's affected the way you approach the instrument at all, or approach sound?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. Because when you hear the great singers, I'm not saying that I play in this way, but I try. My playing changed a lot listening to great singers. Mm-hmm. It's like, what are we doing? We're all trying to emulate the voice, right? In a way.
Yeah.
I mean, when you try and sing on your instrument, whatever it is, it's just this kind of natural way of singing, of letting a phrase go, especially rubato. And is it natural, or is it, when you hear a great singer, like I think of Domingo when I heard him in his prime, and it's like, why is he so amazing? It's just so crystal clear, and it's so natural. It's so easy. It was the easiest thing playing with him.
Something that I think is totally fascinating. Like, I've taken a couple opera auditions. Actually, I guess I've only taken, I was, anyway, it doesn't matter. But I took like a lyric audition and a couple of smaller things, and just wrapping my brain around that list. And, you know, from the Falstaff, the famous, you know, is at the beginning of Act 3, you know, and some of those other, obviously Otello we all play for different things, but like, I've been doing this recently on a couple of these interviews, and people seem to really dig it. So if you're okay with it, if we could just take a few of the more common excerpts that appear on a MET bass audition. Would you mind? Maybe could we go through a few of them and what you're looking for in them, and maybe even like what knocks people out of the running in some of them? I think that'd be super helpful.
It's interesting. So I don't think it's really important. Like, for instance, if you take the MET audition and let's say you play Otello and the tempos are all wrong and the phrasing seems to be wrong. However, it's perfectly in tune and you have a great sound. Then you're probably going to be considered until maybe the end. So I think the whole phrasing and playing it the way it should sound like normally is kind of the end gravy in terms of the finished product, right? I mean, I hate to say that this is like a robotic kind of technical thing, but I think there is no difference between preparing an opera audition and a symphonic audition. In tune, great rhythm, great sound production, musical on top of it. That's what makes people stand out. But getting back to the first part of your question, so somebody recently played Otello for me, and it's really interesting because everybody plays Otello, everybody knows Otello, but very few people really know how Otello should sound in context and the pacing of it. They all know about the 16th note violas and between the rests with the bass drum, right? But they rarely get the tempo right. It's always too slow, or the end seems to accelerate too much. There's kind of a natural way that's within, you know, I've played it a bunch of times with many different conductors, and it's always kind of within these parentheses. Nothing is too far out. So that's interesting, just to kind of know about what's kind of normal. And somebody also played for me recently some excerpts from Valkyria, and they were searching around for these excerpts, which were, I think, on the lyric list, and we have a couple of the standard excerpts. And then it took them like an hour to find the excerpts, right? And I remember doing that too with Meistersinger, but it's really, really hard even to listen to the record to get it into your bones at that point. So it's great to get a kind of, you know, general idea of tempi and things like that. But I would say don't worry about it so much. Certainly it helps to just get the basic style of the character down. Sometimes Meistersinger, the overture, or is it the prelude, is done, bom, 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 to get just the kind of style of the fatness of the stroke. What else is kind of typical? I mean, you mentioned Falstaff. I mean, that's It's so hard, isn't it?
Man, that's a hard excerpt to start.
Well, if people are actually going to listen to this, then everybody should feel better, because every time we do it in the orchestra falls apart on Act 3 anyway. No, I'm serious. It's like, it's so hard. And it's so bizarre, too, because, we did that so many times with Levine. That was kind of one of his signature pieces.
Yeah.
We would start in the tempo, and it's just a nice, easy tempo. The basses come in. Another string section, what is it, the cellos and then the violas?
I think, yeah.
It starts getting faster and faster, and we're all looking at each other. We're like, what the, and you're dead. It's just, it doesn't matter if it's the Met Orchestra or Vienna State Opera or Chicago Lyric. There's some things that are just incredibly difficult, no matter how often you repeat them, So
I have to ask, because I remember chatting with Greg in the Lyric and some of these other guys, this really hilarious violist named Frank Babbitt, lyric opera, disaster stories. Do you think the Met, it's like this, kind of like the holy grail of opera companies. Have you had any particularly entertaining musical or otherwise disasters that...
How many hours do you have to talk?
Or even the top couple.
The top couple. Well, there's such funny stories. And there was this guy named Dick Kay. He was a cellist, old guy with a very gruff New York voice like this. And he had a Tekler, and this guy could wipe out the entire side of the pit from the first show. I once tried to play as loud as I possibly could, and I still couldn't hear myself next to Dick Kay when he was putting it out. So we're playing Faust. Julius Rudel is conducting. This is in performance. Mm-hmm. I think it's between somewhere in Act 3 where there's a big organ prelude, very church-like, right? And he's conducting away. There's backstage chorus. No organ in performance. Everybody's kind of looking around and oh crap, it's going to be one of these moments, right? Rudel, who used to get very worked up, he's looking around. He's putting his hands up. He's yelling, "Organ, where's the organ?" Tom Bernan, who was the assistant personnel manager at this point, was playing in the bass section, and he kind of shouts, whispers, "Maestro, the organ's not working." Dick Kay ahead doesn't miss a beat, and he says, "I know the feeling." This is in the show, right? And I'm just crying because I can't play at that point. And finally somebody hit a switch. The organ came in. It was pretty damn entertaining. And there's a lot of funny things that happen. That's one of them. I have a lot, What another one. There was an older member of the viola section. Don't have to repeat his name, but this guy was really up there, right? I'm rehearsing down on sea level, and it's pretty cool. I heard this sound like twang, and I'm looking over. I'm like, what the hell was that? And it's this guy's leaning down on the floor, and he picks up his viola because it just fell on the floor. Pavarotti, at the very end of his career, was standing out there. He did the typical, blowing kisses and holding his handkerchief up. And the Met curtain, what does it weigh, a ton or something on these gigantic cables? And Pavarotti's out there, and the curtain goes up, and he gets caught in the curtain. And I thought, I was mortified. I'm like, oh my God, he's going to get sucked up to, he's dead, Yeah. And again, Tom and Lou Cosma, they're there, and they're just laughing. They're on the floor. They think it's the funniest thing they've ever seen, Stuff is flown in.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah. Tosca threw her harp down, right before she kills Scarpia in Act 2. Giuro, and she throws her fan down. It flies into the pit and bounces off my strings. So I was like, twang. Yeah. There's so many stories like that. Really, just amazing. And then you heard the recent thing where the guy threw the ashes in the pit.
Yeah,
that was big news.
What happened exactly?
It was this guy who we were playing. William Tell, 5 hours. Right, we had with the last act is 25 minutes. We had played through the whole thing, and in the second intermission, he had his friend and mentor died. And he had his ashes, and he was going around to all of these hallowed opera houses and spreading his ashes. So he chose to come right up to the podium and threw his ashes onto the score on the podium. Ann Scherer, horn player, was in the pit, and we were all in the bass room hanging out, and she saw this, and she went outside and notified somebody who talked to security, and they're like, we don't know what's going on. They thought it was something. So they decided, we had gotten wind of this, and the intermission is getting incredibly long. So they finally made an announcement that they were going to cancel the performance, and then we sprinted into the pit, and we got our basses out, right? And then, like, right after we got the basses out, they made the announcement that the pit is closed and nobody can go back in. And cellos are out there, violins are there, and yeah, crazy.
Wow.
Nuts.
Hey, Jason, this is James Peterson from Peabody Conservatory, one of the winners of the Kaplan String Contest. I just want to thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to get free strings. Those things are not cheap, and as a student, that really helps out. I've really enjoyed using the strings. I like to play loud, and I like to play really articulate, and these strings are great for that. It's been really even across the bass. I've noticed I haven't had to use as much rosin as I usually use. And I've always had a really bad E string on my bass, and the Kaplan seems to work quite well.
Well, thank you, James. And as James said, he was one of the winners of our Kaplan Strings giveaway earlier this year with D'Addario Strings, our longtime sponsor. Kaplan Strings, they rock. They're on my bass right now. They're, like James described, they're great for orchestral playing, but they're great for jazz playing. They're great for all sorts of styles. Brandino, multi-Grammy Award winner, played with Outkast and Black Eyed Peas and a host of other artists. He uses Kaplans for everything. So they work really well. And thank you for sponsoring the podcast, D'Addario. And I would like to give a shout out to the last sponsor of this episode. That is A440 Violin Shop, located in my quasi-adopted hometown, I guess. I lived in Chicago for 21 years. And when I lived in Chicago, I'd go to A440. If I had an open seam, if I had a crack that needed repairing, I was always banging my bass around when I was at Northwestern. And A440 always took care of me. They've got great instruments there. They've got student models all the way up to fine professional instruments. They're located in a beautiful neighborhood called Roscoe Village, just west of Wrigley Field. Check them out, a440violinshop.com. Here we go with the last part of this conversation, and I really hope you're enjoying this conversation. I just can't get enough of chatting with Leigh. Got to get him back on the show again. So this is the final part of our conversation with Leigh Mesh.
So you sold a bass recently at Robertson's. What are you playing on these days? Just basses? Everybody's always asking. I always forget to ask that sort of thing, and people love to geek out on that.
Sure. I am playing Tim Cobb's bass that I bought from him.
Okay.
It was the Vincenzo Iorio that he'd played on for 35 plus years.
Wow.
He had the bass in Curtis. He and his, I mean, that's another story, but he had played that his whole career. And I was just amazed that he wanted to make the move. But I played next to that bass in school for 20 years in the Met, sitting together. I mean, I love that bass. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm playing on.
Wow. What's that? When was that bass made? Do you know any of the details behind it?
It's attributed to, it's Naples, Vincenzo Iorio. It's, between 1830 and 40 about.
Okay.
And it's gigantic. I mean, people thought I was crazy because I'm not a big guy. I'm very average, 5'10" or whatever. My arms are longer, but the bass, the bridge is moved up, but where the bridge to be in its normal position is probably 44-inch string length.
Okay, wow.
And the ribs are deep. But I did some stuff. I set it up, and with those old basses that have that unique sound and voice, you could do pretty much anything to them, and it doesn't really change. That's kind of it. But I did make it more comfortable to play on. But interesting, when you're talking, just about geeking out, I'm the king of changing basses. I mean, I've been through 12 basses.
Really? 12
in my
basses?
Career.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on my fifth Italian bass in my career at the Met. I mean, and I've been through a ton of bows too. I love instruments. I'm really attracted to bows and basses, but I kind of feel that if something is incrementally better than what I'm playing on, or gives me something that I'm looking for, which is just clarity or another quality, I have no problem. I'll switch in a second. And I just sell something and make the change. I've done it with modern instruments and Italian instruments too. I don't actively go out and look, but if a couple of times there have been some basses that have gotten brought into the Met, and I play a note on it, and I think, oh man, do I want to go through this again? Because it's a whole ordeal going through an instrument change. But I play something, and I was like, oh man, looks like going to have to be going this direction, possibly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean, some people are so attached, right? I understand there's a whole emotional bond, but I definitely have not missed one of my instruments that I've kind of betrayed or given up on. You know what I mean?
No, is that the bass you use for everything, or is that strictly your opera bass?
Yeah, I mean, I live very close to Arnold Schnitzer of AES, so I've seen him for years, and he's an instrument maker, and I have a small ergo bass by him. You can't play solo stuff on this bass. It's literally too gigantic. So I have that one, and I've got that. I mean, I play for lots. I wouldn't say it's my opera bass. It's my kind of orchestral style bass. Yeah.
Okay, cool. In terms of bows, do you have one or couple bows that are your go-to bows these days?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I find it also, I know some people who are fortunate enough to like acquire a lot of bows, and it's like they have a collection. I can't play more than 2 bows at a time. If you really like something, then you gravitate towards that and you play that full time, let's say. And if you have another bow that's a really nice bow, but you don't play it, it's just sitting around somewhere, and then the hair becomes unplayable. I'm kind of like for me, if I cannot play a bow if the hair gets too old or it gets powdery or dry. So I have, at this point, I have maybe 3 bows, but I just can't have more than that. It doesn't make sense. Funny or not, I recently sold a really good bow that I had for years. It's actually a bow that I got into the Met on. So it had sentimental, value, and it was beautiful and everything, but I sold it and I bought this awesome new mountain bike, and then I blew out my whole shoulder. So it's kind of ironic.
Funny how that works.
Yeah.
And you've done a lot of teaching over the years. Obviously, are you teaching at Bard right now? Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Cool. And lots of master classes all over and that sort of thing. Yeah. And I love these wide questions, so apologies in advance. But
no, sure.
But a lot of all sorts of folks listen to these, but a lot of the like high school age, undergrad age, people looking to move ahead in their careers, and so they're just like anxious for any sort of wisdom, tips, whatever. So maybe we could just start with like what you get a student at Bard or wherever you happen to be working with them. Do you have any go-to materials, technique books, like for example, like the Contemporary Concept, or any particular etude books or technique exercises? What do you like to take people through?
Absolutely. Some of my colleagues will definitely disagree. I think if you're a bass player, you got to get the Zimmerman books.
Yeah.
They're the Bible. They're the starting Bible. You have every single bass part. You have generally much of the standard bowings that are used by orchestras everywhere. You've got fingerings. And I do tons of different stuff. Yeah. But people come to me and they've got like a Xerox blank copy of Beethoven Fifth Symphony or Brahms Second Symphony. And I'm just like, I understand putting in your bowings and stuff, although having never studied that stuff before, to not have just like kind of the basic ideas seems kind of crazy to me. It's invaluable. You change the bowings, put different fingerings, whatever, but you just have that as a base, and they're incredible, And it's funny, I've still got my old Zimmerman books, and people laugh like the Beethoven book was $5, and I have duct tape along the edges and stuff. But so now they have the spiral binders. But to me, I'm kind of insistent because it's a start. Like to look at a Beethoven symphony or a Strauss tone poem with a blank canvas with no bowings or fingerings in, it's like, where do you even start? You know?
Right.
So that very much so. I don't really do etudes. I still don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but some people really love ballet. We did ballet in Curtis in those days. There's so many infinite number of studies you could do. I like working on Bach suites. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Bach suites are masterpieces, and you could do anything with them. You could use them for technical studies, bowings. There's a million things you could do with them. So generally, I don't really care too much about an audition because generally I don't like to I tell my students, look, here's what I do. This is what feels comfortable to me. And I try and prove why. And I say to them, do whatever you want. I don't care. I don't care about the bowing or the fingering. If it sounds good, I'll be happy for you to introduce me to something. That's the start. And then solo literature on from there, but nothing much more, regimented than that.
What do you, and just sort of bouncing around back to like some gear, like everybody always wants to know, and I sort of resist asking, but I got to ask because everyone wants to know, is like, what have you played with, like on the string end, on the rosin end, all that sort of like bass nitty gritty?
Yeah, it's really simple. I mean, I've tried every string.
Yeah.
I play bel canto.
Okay.
They're not it's not perfect. It's just for me, they're actually darker than I would like something brighter and clear. They just feel the best left hand and right hand. They're the easiest to have speak. For me, Parastro strings are stiffer. Mm-hmm. And I would sacrifice a lot in order to have things respond easily.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much it. I have a Spiracore red on the bottom because my bass could take it. I've tried Spiracores all throughout. It didn't quite work. You name it, I've tried it. I've tried Parastro solos, tuned down, anything. So that's my string, pretty much collectively. After, I always come back to it. In terms of rosin, I'm a pops guy and I'm a really heavy user. I've tried to like wean myself off, but I just can't. I mean, I put on as much rosin as I possibly can before the bow will like hang on the string without you letting go and sticking there, it's too hard.
Yes.
The low stuff, Beethoven 6, trying to play that without rosin and good bow hair, it's just impossible.
Another thing that people chat about, and I love your perspective, like, in the opera section, or whether you guys are playing symphonic music or whatever, like vibrato in the bass section. When, yes, no, always, never, depending on stylistic times. Are there any sort of kind of agreements you all have come to as a bass section in terms of vibrato in the rep?
Definitely not, because but that's another issue that's kind of getting more into like the interpretive thing, and that gets a little weird. I don't know. I mean, this is a longer conversation.
Sure.
When you tell somebody in the section to vibrate, it implies that they're not vibrating, and then it implies that you're kind of coaching them to play better. And that's a strange thing to do as you're giving a directive to the section. So I tried that for a while, but you got to be careful with that kind of stuff. And that's like that's a weird, like kind of psychosomatic issue of how your section works together. It's a great question. I wish we would do it more, but unfortunately we don't. And unfortunately, many sections don't when they're in a professional orchestra. And it's too bad. It's a shame because we would sound better if we did work on it. Back to the question. I like to vibrate. I like to vibrate a lot. However, I also like to play open strings a lot. And I play more open Gs than I ever have. It's like I hear people talking about, oh my God, you can never play a closed A. And I'm just like, what, are you kidding me? You got to play open A's all the time. But just back to the whole vibrato thing, it's to me, it's all about a beautiful ringing tone. If vibrato is if you hear a string player play and they don't vibrate, and it causes the tone to kind of be a dead sound because it's not vibrated, then you need to vibrate. Then again, if you're vibrating like really intensely and too fast and it sticks out and it's not a blended sound, that's no good either. So I'm all about just trying to get sounds to ring and blend as well as possible. And that's a tough one to do because, wow, now we're getting into the whole section psyche. It's an impossible thing, right? It's like an incredible thing, but you're talking about 8 people together, or 6 in the case of the pit.
Right.
You're playing in unison. Mm-hmm. You're trying to play exactly in unison, perfectly in tune together, but with the exact same articulation and blended sound. It's so hard to do. Really tough. But when you can do it, it's pretty spectacular. And so if you don't have a conductor who could kind of help shape that, and an amazing conductor won't really have to do too much, but just in their language, body language, they're conducting, so to speak. It's not really their verbal directives. When that could happen, even at the level of a great orchestra like the Met or Chicago Symphony, whatever, New York Philharmonic, then it's quite amazing. And it's frustrating that there are so few that can do that. You know, it's, again, I don't mean that to sound cynical, but I think what happens is with musicians, you get to these incredible heights with these amazing Simon Rattle, James Levine, this heyday, you know, that you're kind of scaling the heights of our art form. And then when you play under that, it's good, but it's not quite what it was. Then people tend to feel very frustrated. They want that.
Yeah. Yeah. What's that magic sort of thing like we were talking about earlier? I was chatting with a bass player, Alexandra Scott, plays in the Bavarian Radio Orchestra, and Simon Rattle conducts them a lot. We were just chatting, like the magic of Simon Rattle. What is it exactly that sort of like takes him up, you know, into that? And it's hard to, it's like, you know, like what made Steve Jobs special or what made, you know, some of these other figures. You know.
But it's also really interesting because generally it's, you know, their genius and brilliance is only one part of the equation. It's also the charisma that they can inspire people who are very, very smart, very talented to come together. It's a unique gift that, how do you teach that, right?
Yeah, right. Right. If you could teach it, there'd probably be a lot more people doing it. You know, it's like one of those fascinating like mixes.
Well, it's kind of like also it's the unspoken leadership gift. Like leadership is, I think we could use a lot more training in it. In our field, it's like you get out of conservatory. It's like who's ever spoken about how to be a principal player? I never heard of it. Right. You just get there and you either observe it and you do it well. You learn what to do or what not to do. But it's kind of like it's kind of a sense that somebody has. And how do people, you know, quietly with dignity help people to give their best? Really hard thing to do.
It is. And it's one of those skills, like you look around and you can see like a certain section member or a conductor or whoever like has that ability and someone like thinks they have that ability, but they totally don't. And it just drives the section crazy. And yeah, it's a fascinating.
I think the good vibe is one of the most important traits, right? Because everybody who I've seen who is amazingly gifted and talented, who have kind of like a negative or arrogant vibe, it just doesn't work. People don't respond to that. You just shut down after a while. Christian Thielemann, I mean, he has such a, I hope he doesn't hear this podcast. That's all right. I haven't seen him for years. He's so brilliant and like he's so arrogant, it's almost laughable. And I think if you worked with him constantly, you would just start shutting off to it. You know, just think, come on already.
And it's a hard thing, I think, if musicians who haven't been in leadership roles, they especially depending on your training, but a lot of our training has been, you know, I don't want to say like completely negative, but a lot of like focused on the what to do better side rather than like creating a good vibe. I think it's a tough skill to develop if you haven't been around that.
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot. You can talk about it, and you could talk about it with students, and it actually really starts in ensembles in high school, in college. The same problems with people kind of butting heads or getting into conflict are exactly the same conflicts that people in my orchestra go through. It's the inability to kind of communicate respectfully, or people get insecure and then they have animosity that they can't release and they don't know how to verbalize. And, it's tough in an orchestra, especially in the string section, because think about the string section in the bass section, for instance. How often does the principal bass player really have a solo? Like almost never. We're all playing the same stuff together. We're doing the same thing, Yeah,
it's a fascinating topic. I love thinking about. I thought about that a lot. I had a period of time when I went and taught high school. I was a high school orchestra director, and so I thought about that at the high school level.
Wow.
Like, how do you make a good vibe? Like, definitely, and like, how do you make people want to be there and want to, and enjoy each other's company and enjoy the experience? And it's something that, and then like, how do you do it in the bass studio even? Like, I'm sure you've thought about that and you had your experiences at Curtis, and then you've, taught a lot yourself. Like, how do you make that studio class, like you were describing at Curtis? How do you make something like that could be very intimidating, right? Let's go around and play Mozart 36 for each other. How do you make that? How do you make that a safe a space for good vibes and like constructive development?
Well, I think if you're the teacher and you're running it, then you really have to kind of gauge how each person is going to react to what you're suggesting. Some people love to just get hammered. Other people are really sensitive. They shut down to that. You got to try and be as aware as possible and try and be as supportive as possible. Even the people that I've known, people who just want to get hammered over and over again, like, no, do it again. But eventually everybody needs support and understanding and positive reinforcement. Yeah.
And it's so many different personalities, right? Because I totally know that personality you're talking about. Just give it to me straight.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Support, definitely. I mean, you've heard about these teachers who have been SOBs, right? That doesn't work. I mean, who wants to have that, You could probably learn something from them, but it's too hard, It's too tough. And people are insecure enough as it is going into this crazy line of work, trying to, will I be able to make it? Will I play well enough? I mean, you're always kind of scrutinizing yourself all the time. It doesn't stop when you've been playing in these orchestras for all these years.
Right. Well, I got one more question I like to ask.
Yeah, sure.
It's like and like anybody who looked from the outside at like Leigh Mesh's career, you'd be like, wow, this meteor rise, right? Like Curtis, and then you're like, how long were you in Columbus and Indianapolis? Were you there?
I was almost 2 years in Columbus. I say almost because it was just under. Almost 4 seasons in Indianapolis. Then I did that stint in Chicago. And then I went to the Met. So I was essentially working for about 7 years before I got to the Met. I got the Met job when I was 29.
What do you think? You're probably knocking on the door through those 7 years and taking some auditions. But what do you think kind of unlocked those doors for you? That Chicago Symphony door and the Met, that you ultimately ended up at. Was it a difference in your preparation or mindset, or what? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, certainly. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, even when I was in Columbus Symphony out of Curtis, like I had something going on, right? Because I got into the finals of Chicago when Michael, we just spoke of him, Hovnanian got the job. Mm-hmm. It was Michael and Eric Harris who got the job. There were 2 jobs, and then Doug Summer and myself. So there were 4 of us for 2 spots. It's like 50-50. Will you get the job, right? So those guys got the job. And, so I had success then. So I was obviously doing something right at that point. But then, it didn't mean that I was like in the finals and it was steady. There was a couple of auditions I didn't get anywhere in, which was, shocking and disconcerting, all the rest. So it was kind of in those days, it was kind of up and down. But then what happened for me is I think it's super, super important for anybody who's on the audition circuit to be finding the right person that could help them, or person or persons. And that doesn't necessarily mean your major teacher. And I'm not saying like betray your teacher, right? But you need a lot of different information. And I think it's really important to get other points of view. And if you find that if something is really making sense to you, then you kind of have to pursue that. You know, I know teachers can be sometimes very, very, it's like a stranglehold on their students and you can't get other information, but it's a disservice to the student. Anyway, I coached with a bunch of people, and Tim Pitts really, it's interesting. I went up to Tim Pitts. I was in Indianapolis and Columbus, and he coached me a bunch of times, gave me a lot of time. I met him when it was kind of like an intersection of my mind and ears opening up and him giving me some information that was new. It was like the floodgates kind of opened at that point. And what really happened for me was when I got super, super consistent at the end in these auditions and jobs was when I was feeling really, really secure, technically, musically. And that gave me a ton of confidence. I felt like when you're consistent, you could play certain things really well, and you felt like you knew you were playing them really well in any kind of circumstance. I know when people go to auditions, you walk on stage, and if it's ice cold, you're in trouble, right? But that shouldn't be the case. You have to be so secure in your playing that really, if your bass gets lost and you have to borrow somebody's bass at the audition, you could feel pretty solid. And I got to that point, and I think that helped with my confidence a lot.
You know, I was talking with Carl Fenner recently,
Sure.
who's one of the the most recent guy in Atlanta, or one of the most.
Yeah.
And he was talking about getting a coaching. He was sort of like hit a wall in his development, and it was one of those things that was so simple as like, why don't you just move your left arm a little bit differently here? It was something like one of those things that was just like the thing that I mean, do you remember the advice that Tim Pitts gave you when you had that like alignment of? Was it on specific excerpts or something about playing in general or approaching auditions in general? Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, it's really interesting because at this point there was like this whole mystique about the Philadelphia sound, which is like, well, what is that? I don't know what it is. But there was this conception that Philadelphia was like long and brushy, and then the Boston style was kind of short and pecky and much more articulate, which I didn't really kind of get. But I didn't really know at this point, and I didn't really know Tim, but I just knew that when I went and played for him, he sounded great, and he played with incredible clarity. And two things that really stood out when I went to his house, I'll never forget, I was playing Lieutenant Kiji solo. And I didn't even realize that I was doing all this kind of crazy swelling bow speed stuff in the bow. And he had me actually just play the solo on one note with no vibrato, like a G harmonic closed. Instead of playing da-dee-ah-da-dee-dee, and I don't have perfect pitch, so I don't know what pitches I'm singing. So I would go da-da-da-da-da-da. Sorry, I changed the pitch in my voice, but you wouldn't worry about the pitches. You would only play it in the bow and listen for, are you playing without swells? Are you actually phrasing with that bow? And that really was a huge deal for me. It kind of uncovered that I was doing a lot of crazy stuff. And you realize you're drifting all over from bridge up to fingerboard. You're changing the sound and you're doing a lot of stuff. Also, he talked about my left hand, which was pretty good at that point. I had some jobs, but I was still like playing horrendously out of tune. You know, I mean, no, it wasn't horrendous, but basically if you're playing out of tune, you're playing out of tune, whether it's minor or major, it's either out of tune, right? His intonation was kind of impeccable. And he turned me on to this kind of starker double stop hand position thing, which is essentially a kind of exercise where you would play in one position with no shifts across two strings. And then you would just do a kind of pattern. And then you would do the double stops in that position. Not fourths, but you do the thirds and you do the fifth. You could do the fourths. It really didn't matter. And that kind of changed my whole life because I realized that my left hand was a mess and the spacing between my fingers was a mess as well. And then I also kind of thought, well, how can I play a scale or shift anywhere if all the notes within a position that I don't shift are out of tune? So I started doing that. I did kind of what he suggested, although I came up with my own kind of thing, and it just changed me. It absolutely changed me. It opened my ears to it, and I kind of jumped up a whole nother level of hearing things clearly that I hadn't previously. So those were the two watershed moments that I attribute to Tim. Thanks, Tim. If you ever hear this, such a great guy.
Yeah, totally. No, absolutely. Oh man, that's fantastic. I usually end with some sort of what advice would you give your younger self kind of question. And you could, I don't know what age would be helpful, whether it's that, at before you got to Curtis, or like Leigh right at Curtis, or anything along those lines would be great.
There are so many things I would have told my younger self. I was such a crazy hothead, with all this energy. I mean, I still have energy, but I'm like calmer and older and wiser now. Wow, what could I tell my younger self? It's funny because I don't think I could have told my younger self anything because I wouldn't have listened.
I know the feeling.
But I guess if could I skirt that? But if I would tell one thing, which is so interesting with younger players, do ask anything you want, especially comments. I'm amazed when I listen to, I do Verbier in the summer. I've coached there for a bunch of years, and when people audition, and I listen to probably 60 audition videos, I take notes. You can ask. You can get comments. Some people think they're not allowed to inquire about that. You could take those comments with a grain of salt, but you can always ask for anything. What's the worst that'll happen? Somebody will say, no, I can't do that. Definitely ask. That's probably the best advice I could give young people.
That's great advice. Like, how many people ask out of all the people that audition for something like that, right? It's probably like 5%, maybe, actually follow through and like get something like that. Maybe higher also, for certain auditions, but yeah.
Yeah, and also people, they think that, for instance, with Verbier or even Bard or they're interested in a place, you can ask for a lesson. You could do a lesson by Skype. You could get in touch. You could have correspondence. Could always try.
Wasn't that a great conversation? Thank you, Leigh. I had such a great time chatting with you. And this is why I like doing this show, folks. I have such a good time sitting down and chatting with people like Leigh. And it's a funny process for me. I'll go behind the curtain for a second. So I record conversations like this. Sometimes they're live. Sometimes they're over Skype. Sometimes they're over FaceTime or whatever. And I have such a wonderful time chatting with the person. And then it goes in my podcast vault for a while because I am active with many projects, and podcasting is probably the bulk of what I do, I guess, maybe, or 50% of what I do these days, but I'm doing a lot of other things. And then I sort of move on with my life, and this podcast is sitting there, and then the thought of, oh no, I need to go edit the podcast, and I need to break it up, and I need to work on the levels, and I need to blah, 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 blah. And I just see this looming, overwhelming project, and I am not enthused about doing this project. And then I sit down and say, okay, Jason, time to podcast edit and record the audio, whatever. And I open it up and I start listening. And then I get all excited again because I remember how much fun it was and what I learned and the takeaways, and start taking notes. So if I were to graph my sort of enthusiasm and enjoyment, it's like, for these interview shows, chatting, and then I sort of see the work that I know that I'm going to have to do, because if you probably haven't done a podcast, but it's a ton of work. It is, I would say, 10 times the work of like writing a blog post. That's my sort of rough metric. Now, doing a really high quality video show, which is part of why I don't do video, people have asked, I think that's 10x the audio. seriously, to really do video well. And so I love audio. And I also like to listen to audio when I'm in the car, when I'm on the treadmill, or when I'm cooking dinner or whatever. And that's probably how you're listening to this too. So we're getting you in a moment when you really don't want to be using your eyes, but you can be listening and using your mind and engaging in something that you find inspiring. And I hope that you found this inspiring. So this is a little peek behind the curtain of how this all works. I've got a great episode coming up as we round out the year, just taking a look back at 2017. I try to not do too much navel gazing on this show and keep it about topics and about guests and about that sort of thing. But I do think at least once a year, it's nice to kind of look at how things have been going and what the future looks like. So look for that soon. Again, thank you so much, Leigh. I really hope you enjoyed this. You can find us anywhere you listen to audio, folks, and that includes now Spotify. Yay! We're on Spotify. And even before I knew we were on Spotify, it's a long behind the scenes and quite boring process that I won't talk about right now. But I got an email notification and I said, oh, wait, Spotify. And I logged in and there were all these people that were already listening on Spotify. So if you're a Spotify-er, that is another of the many options that you can use to tune into the show. They can all be found at contrabassconversations.com/subscribe. That's going to do it for another episode. I'd like to thank Leigh. I'd like to thank our sponsors. But most of all, I'd like to thank you for taking the time. Time's the one resource that we can't make more of, right? That's the line we all hear. And I'm just honored that you would take the time to join Leigh and to join me for what I hope has been an inspiring, useful, educational conversation. That's what we're trying to do here, and I hope we did that, and I appreciate you for tuning in. That's going to do it, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.